For some analysis, we're now joined by the Executive Director of the Civic Education for Constitution Awareness and Reforms in Kenya, Joshua Changwony. Thank you so much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy and delighted to be part of this program.
Thank you. So it's significant. The manifestos have been presented to the people. Just give us a sense about the average Kenyan. Do they listen to these manifestos? Do they read them? Do they study them? Or is this just a process that Kenyans go through to have manifestos, but actually in the end, they're deciding on other issues?
Yeah, thank you very much. Away from the 2013 and the 2017 general elections experiences, the 2022 general elections in Kenya have given us the lowest number of presidential candidates, unlike those two other past elections. We only have 4. Out of these 4, we have one from a coalition party of 23, and that is the Azimio la Umoja. We have one alliance of parties led by one political party, that is for Kenya Kwanza. And then we have 2 individual parties giving us the 2 other presidential candidates. The 3 presidential candidates have female running mates away from 2013 and the 2017 general elections. Away from those 2 other past elections, the manifestos in these general elections of 2022 is around the economy of Kenya. They are unique, yet similar, and covers usual issues ranging from political, economic, and social. But again, important to note is that in the election of 2007, the Azimio la Umoja presidential candidate and the running mate were not in the same camp. They were opposing each other during that election, and that is former Prime Minister Raila Odinga and former Minister of Justice Martha Karua. But Raila Odinga and William Ruto in that election of 2007 were on one side. And remember, that was one of the elections that gave us problems in our country. But again, you've asked that these manifestos that have been provided for by the 4 presidential candidates, would they really solve the problems that Kenyans face? My answer is yes and no. Yes and no by the virtue that the issues that have been touched by the 4 presidential candidates are almost similar. They could be presented differently, but they touch on issues that are affected on the day-to-day lives of an average Kenyan. For instance, when they talk about revive the economy by the Kenya Kwanza or double the digital economy by the Azimio la Umoja, or even, for instance, ensure that Kenyans pay the external or international debt by growing marijuana. I know in Kenya, marijuana is very illegal. It's outlawed, it's not acceptable, but there is the use of the medicinal purposes by the presidential candidate of the Roots Party that would solve and earn us more money. But you can see the calculations and the figures that they provide is very outrageous, does not make a lot of sense to an average Kenyan. But again, given the social problems that Kenyans face, where we have many youth who are engaged in drugs, they are most likely to buy that idea of legalizing marijuana because that is something that they know away from the law, away from the average Kenyan problems, because that is, you will find them discussing that presidential candidate to the contrary of the provisions of the Constitution. We have the Agano Party, which is led by the Bishop David Moure. He has given us a 12-point manifesto, and he's talking about change. Increase revenue allocation to counties from 40%, and out of that 40%, 10%, to the village councils. And that is what is provided for in the Constitution in terms of having what is called devolution, devolve power and resources to the lowest unit of the society, which in Kenya is the village. And when you look at those are the interests of every Kenyan, that power and resources would be lowered down to where the common person lives on a day-to-day basis. But again, there are sweeteners in these manifestos by each of the presidential candidates by waiving burdens, such as, for instance, in Agano Party, they talk of waiving 50% of the pay-as-you-earn tax. And that is very attractive. When you look at the Roots Party, there is a sweetener which the presidential candidate, Professor George Wajakoya, is telling Kenyans that he's going to ensure that Kenyans work 4 days in a week out of the usual 5 days, so that to give Muslims, the Christians, time to worship Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, so that Kenyans can work from Monday to Thursday. Very sweet, but again, yet very impractical. And of course, making very, very outrageous promises, such as export of dog meat and keeping of snakes, so that these snakes can, their venom, the venom, that the poison that they produce, can be exported for the manufacture of antivenin. Things which Kenyans are hearing, coming into the public spaces for the first time. Then I want to conclude by saying that each of these presidential candidates have their own pillars. For instance, the Kenya Kwanza have 4 pillars, which is agriculture, and agriculture is known to be the mainstay for our country, housing and settlement, which is a major problem in the urban areas of our country, healthcare, because there is a lot of allocation of public resources to healthcare, and more specifically drugs, and then the digital superhighway. And on the other hand, the Azimio la Umoja, they are focused on 5 key issues when you look at their manifesto, which is centered around uniting Kenyans. And they are uniting Kenyans by dissecting problems facing Kenya. And they are talking about political inclusion, which has been a major problem in our country since independence in 1963. Divisive elections, because as in the past elections, any very post-election have provided a very unique challenge to our country. Insecurity, corruption, the fight against corruption, which has also been touched by the other presidential candidate, and reviving of the economy, which has also been touched by the other candidates. For me, when I studied the 4 manifestos, if revenue would allow the implementation of these manifestos, Kenya would be a different country, because each of these manifestos is very unique, yet the same. Back to you.
All right, so I guess the question then is, yes, there are sweeteners, there are promises. Do the voters genuinely believe that these presidents will deliver? Or do they live in hope election after election after election?
In every election in our country, the dominant factor which has informed decisions by majority of voters is ethnicity, unfortunately. It is not manifestos. Ethnicity, in the sense that politicians during campaigns have used the various spaces of campaigns to balkanize the country. Unfortunately, that is the observation as we see currently, because even when you look at these political parties, more so the leading contenders, which is the Azimio la Umoja and the Kenya Kwanza, their stronghold is informed from where the presidential candidate is coming from. And the chances of the communities where these presidential candidates come from, for them to interrogate the manifestos in an objective manner away from the identity of the presidential candidate is low. It is more of, this is our person, this is our person who is going to lead us into power, and it will be our time to be in government and also to be part of power. And the persuasion that the presidency is the gateway to development in communities, and not necessarily the ideology that the presidential candidate is presenting to the country. Then the last bit is that Manifestos, like for instance, these other manifestos, such as the one for the Roots Party, like for instance, growing of marijuana, keeping of snakes, and even harvesting of, let's say, the hyenas, the body parts of the hyenas, as promised by that presidential candidate, is lovable. It is very entertaining, and people discuss it in public space, but people would still want to attach themselves to the presidential candidate coming from their tribe.
All right. Perhaps as we start to think about wrapping up, I look at a country like America, and what you find there is 40% will always vote Democrat, 40% will always vote Republican, and there's that 20% in between that actually ends up deciding the election. Is there a cohort of citizens in Kenya that are not about ethnicity, that are genuinely about issues, that may have a carrying vote? Or is the ethnic vote so dominant that it doesn't matter about the people in between?
Thank you very much for your question. We have 3 clusters of voters in the voters register in our country. One are the persons who are living within the territory of Kenya, which informs, the majority of the 22.1 million registered voters. We have the diaspora voters, and we have voters who are in prison. The diaspora voters and the voters who are in prison, who are registered and are captured in the voters register, will be voting only for the presidential candidates. For those ones, they could be united through probably their common agenda of being either in diaspora or being in prison. But those ones who are living in our country, or in Kenya for that matter, are the middle class, are a population who are isolated, and they are, living with voter apathy. They look very disappointed, just like what is happening with the leadership, the political class, and it's like probably I even don't see the reason of voting. But their participation is most likely to be informed by an objectivity, and probably through these manifestos, because they will be able to read and understand these manifestos. But for any average Kenyan who is on a day-to-day basis in the villages or in the communities, they will be listening to the speeches of the politicians, and these speeches of the politicians are not even informed or are directed by the manifestos that they have put together in terms of print and paper. But for me, I look at the isolated cases of those other voters, not necessarily to be the deciding factors in terms of voting, because the majority of the population that is going to vote and pass a presidential candidate are people who are in the communities, and they are the majority. They are the people who turn up to vote. The youth, for example, are the majority. From the Electoral Commission, the youth forms the majority of the voters. And those are people who are being mobilized by politicians to come and vote. And for them, their problems are encompassed in these manifestos, such as employment, and of course, given priority in government development agendas.
All right. Sadly, we've run out of time, and we're going to leave it there. Thank you very, very much indeed for joining us. Asante sana kwa muda wako.
Karibu sana, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with the South African Broadcasting Corporation.
Wonderful. Good night to you. All right, that's Mr. Changwe speaking to us about the Kenyan elections. The manifestos have been released, and he says that by and large, Kenyans still vote on ethnic lines, however interesting some of those manifestos may be.